Hi, my name is Aline Renault, and my lovely partner was Alina, and we were responsible for week 9. That was pages 55 through 110, and that consisted of 3 very interesting articles. So the first article, Community-Based Pedagogies by Laura Houllier, probably saying that wrong, Kathleen Livingston, and Eli Goldblatt. I think that this quote really sums it up, these two. Information severed from thoughtful action is dead, a mind-crushing load, John Dewey, and that was actually the beginning of the article. And community-engaged pedagogies have enlivened our teaching practices and forced us to reflect on our own goals as citizens and humans on the planet, and the R and us that it's referring to are the authors. The way that this article was formatted is they each took turns answering some critical questions that they found people had about community-based pedagogies. So the authors seek to share their wisdom gained from their own experiences and perspectives after attempting community-based literacy pedagogies themselves. So they're coming from a place of experience. The 5 common questions that they had themselves and also have encountered from others who have come to them for advice is: what is community-engaged pedagogy and how will it help students in a writing course? How do I find community partnerships for my students? What kinds of writing assignments work best for such courses? How do I know my students learned anything? I think a lot of us as instructors or potential instructors care a lot about that one. How does this work benefit the communities we live in? So first question, what is community-engaged pedagogy and how will it help students in a writing course? So the basic premise is that writing is a social act, and then students would work together with a community-based organization or initiative, and whatever their purpose or aim is would be shaped by the public sphere and political consciousness. There's a lot of activism involved. Some important logistics to keep in mind as the instructor is you need to define your role, how you facilitate, decide how to assess student work, or just general learning. And you as the instructor need to develop, define, and form that relationship between the instructor and the community. So between yourself and the community if you're the instructor. What is community-engaged pedagogy and how will it help students in a writing course? Continued. So they offer flexibility, and this is flexibility for the instructor in purpose, audience, the type of community engagement, definition of a community, and assessments. So you can define the purpose or the audience, although they recommend taking a democratic approach with those and letting your students have a say. Especially want to let your students have a say in what type of community engagement, but this might not be realistic because you'll start the semester and you only have 15 weeks in your normal semester. So a lot of times you need to already have those relationships in place with the community and already have expectations of what will be accomplished. You need to define the community. Is it local? Are we talking international level? And then obviously assessments are going to be your responsibility, and you need to decide what you want your students to get out of them. So there's 2 different kinds of categorizations of tackling purpose and audience in this article, this first section of the article. Nora Bacon said that writing as service or writing about service is what community engaged pedagogy and composition is, right? But Thomas Dean says that it involves writing for, writing about, or writing with community partners. So as I said before, students can potentially decide for themselves purpose, form, genre, voice, and problem-solving scenarios, but once again, you need to be wary of your time constraints. The instructors must define community. So here are some examples lifted right from the text of what this might look like. So research, draft, revise, and edit documents that serve an organization's needs, interview residents of a nursing home to record personal histories, tutor underserved school kids in after-school reading and writing programs, help elementary students write and illustrate school newspapers or zines, however you want to pronounce that, produce media that does work on behalf of nonprofit organizations, partner with an organization or community group to learn about and advocate on behalf of particular civic and social issues in the community. That is not an exhaustive list. Those are just some really, really good examples. But important, in all of these examples, students are able to wrestle with, analyze, revise, and produce variations of discourse in ways that are often impossible in a classroom. And as we know, those of us in education courses, discourse is very, very important. Discourse and syntax. So something else to consider would be the action reflection cycle. It was never called that in the text precisely. I came up with that term myself because I was like, okay, well, this is what it really is. You want your students to act and accomplish various tasks, but more important than that is to actually reflect on the consequences and outcomes of those actions. You know, how did it make me feel? How did it affect the community? What kind of feedback did I get? And it's important to do that throughout the community service learning projects, not just at the end, because ideally you would want to be able to improve throughout and strengthen those relationships with the community. And really, I'm sorry, my dog is licking herself. And really actually make a difference. So you would want to get better as you progress through the project and tweak things. And that reflection portion can definitely serve you greatly as writing assignments. The insider-outsider dilemma. I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term like ivory castle or, us versus them mentality. You don't want to accidentally foster in your students this belief in like their otherness or really like the community's otherness. For instance, if it was a predominantly white classroom and they were helping minorities, you wouldn't want them to have a mindset of, we had to swoop in and save them from themselves because we're the gatekeepers of knowledge. We know how to help. They don't understand how to help themselves. You don't want to accidentally breed that kind of belief because it also leads to contempt and condescension. So you need to be very wary of that. I liked these two quotes. As students interact with others outside their classroom around issues of social justice, economic disparity, or identity, for instance, they are building a knowledge base that allows them to join the academic conversation from a position of authority. If instructors make rhetorical instruction central to their courses and use varieties of genres and contexts, then there is a much higher chance that learning and composition classrooms will indeed transfer to other contexts, both academic and non-academic. And that is something else that in education courses are hammered into you. You need to make things relevant and authentic. But as far as relevancy goes, they need to be able to take these skills and ideas that they've learned in these pedagogies, through your pedagogy really, and they need to be able to transfer them to real life and hopefully their careers later, whether they're academic or non-academic. How do I find community partnerships for my students? So you're going to want to listen carefully to community needs, be willing to put in the work to negotiate relationships, realize students may not be deeply invested in the university or local community. For instance, I'm from California. It's a little more complicated than that, but I moved here from California. Would I truly care about Jacksonville and things going on in Jacksonville? Maybe not as much as I would have cared about my hometown. So you need to be understanding of that. And JSU, for example, has a lot of international students. Are they going to be as deeply invested? Maybe, maybe not. Ensure the partnership has educational benefits and is mutually beneficial to both the students and the community. You would never want to do anything that's harmful to the community, and you certainly wouldn't want to do anything that just maintains the status quo either. You need to look for deeper, more meaningful time investments. How do I find community partnerships for my students? Continued. This was very, very important, at least as I was reading. I was like, ooh, that's very important. Cultural competency. So it is the instructor's responsibility to teach and educate and train their students before going out into the community, how to interact with the community respectfully. One of the examples that the author had was teaching and requiring students to respect preferred pronouns when working with the LGBTQ community. One example from my life that I immediately thought of was how when I worked at Homeland Security, we had something called Tribal Week, where first responders from First Nations would come and get trained. But before they came, we all had a lot of PowerPoint presentations and memos sent out about how to interact with tribal members. For instance, you don't make eye contact with them. You don't hold eye contact with elders if they're older than you. And you would never think that, because I think eye contact is respectful, but in their culture, eye contact, especially with an elder, is very disrespectful. So that's something that you want to address long before you actually send your students out into the communities, whatever community that might be. What kinds of writing assignments work best for such courses? Well, some options were assisting in marketing and communications. A lot of community organizations are going to really appreciate that help. Producing media, which is obviously a lot easier and potentially more meaningful because we have a lot more technology at our fingertips. So videos, newsletters, blogs, social media articles, those can all be types of media that students produce. Ideally, this is coupled with the action reflection cycle. So I think in the next slide, it talks about how journal entries in themselves are not very beneficial. But when you make these other kinds of writing compositions, and then you couple that with the journal entries or blogs that they have to reflect on those actions that they took, that's when you're truly maximizing your potential. This was one kind of idea for how you could structure your syllabus. So a lot of heavy reading, weekly responses, assign a very large research paper, and have them develop a proposal for change. And one educator described how it led to the students publishing works on their own and forming their own student groups, which is pretty neat. Another possible approach, as I mentioned, journal entries and readings about systemic and historical issues. And you can ask, what daily issues do the students face? How can community work benefit them? How can we assist them in analyzing these issues and viewing them through social, historical, and cultural lenses? And I'm going to stop it here, and we can proceed with part 2.